So today we're kind of going to get just to the point and say it a little bit quick. I'm going to go over each deck and why I have it in the category we do. I don't want to do updated, in-depth meta breakdowns every single week. The spreadsheet is linked down below for those of you who care. And don't forget, we have our 5,500 subscriber giveaway where we're giving away a case. Yes, 4 boxes to one lucky subscriber. It's the second time we're doing it. Let's go ahead and smash that goal. So in our top tier, I have Amethyst, Emerald, Aggro, and Tempo both here because while I wouldn't necessarily put Tempo up here, some of these aggro builds tilt into the Tempo too. Like, these two decks are very blurred at the moment. I think that there is kind of the whole spectrum. Like, you have your aggro version, your Tempo version, but so many of them are in this muddy water of they could kind of fall into both categories. So I'm just going to say, like, Amethyst Emerald overall is in a pretty solid spot, and it so far in the month of December has actually garnered the most tops. Again, that spreadsheet is linked down below. I think it's in a great spot with Ruby Amethyst, Sapphire Ruby being just so prevalent, and it actually goes into Steel Song better than something like Amber Amethyst would. And in addition to that, it can compete with other just slower decks because of your ability to hit the songs and hit key cards, gain that hand knowledge through Ursula, also having your bounce package, your Fox, things like that. Both these decks have just such a strong toolbox that I think that's why we're seeing this deck see so much success. In addition to that, I think it's probably one of the highest, if not the highest represented deck at a lot of these events. Then Ruby Sapphire, it was the most topping deck in November, and it's still second place behind Amethyst Emerald. I expect it to probably creep up and overtake that #1 spot as the month progresses, but for right now it is sitting in that second place spot. But it's just one of those decks that you really have to be ready for and expect people at your locals to be playing it. Likewise, Ruby Amethyst, this deck's not going anywhere until something happens to the card pool available. This will always be too consistent, too strong, and a deck to look out for. On the bright side, it's been around for quite a while, and a lot of players just don't like to play it, but I would pretty much expect any competitive local to have at least 2 or 3 die-hard Ruby Amethyst players, where you better just understand how to play against this deck if you're going to be able to beat them. Steel Song is a deck that you would think would be doing so well in an aggro format. We're having so many aggro decks seeing success, and Steel Song can actually play pretty aggressively as well with your Smee, your Piglet, your Lawrence, things like that in your early turns. However, it is kind of teetering on that back end of tier 1, and I think a big part of that is just because the Popsicle matchup can just be so rough to play into. Emerald Steel Discard, another deck that's sitting in that back end of tier 1. Are people just getting tired of playing discard? Does the deck need to change a little bit? Because let's be honest, this deck has been so streamlined, things haven't really changed. There hasn't been much tech room in it, and maybe that's why we're not seeing it as dominant as we have in the past. Let's see in the next week or so how this deck changes. Is it going to be more focused into damage control Emerald Steel maybe? Or is it going to find a different answer for these quick aggro decks who dump their own hand and put characters on board, and then, well, your discard game plan isn't really working. And if you can't get that discard rolling and your Prince John's essentially not drawing you cards, you may end up struggling. Purple Steel's probably been one of the bigger surprises. Purple Steel aggro, to be specific. This deck has been doing a lot. It's got 7 tops so far in December alone, putting it in that 4th place tie with Steel Song. It is ahead of Emerald Steel Discard in that regard. And again, Emerald Amethyst, just putting the 2 tip pictures up there, but it is essentially the same deck. Purple Steel, this is a deck that can play very aggressive characters. And in addition to that, you have Smash, you have Befuddle, you have Fire the Cannons. You have so many answers to slow your opponent's roll and stop their momentum before they can deal with your cards. And I have a video breaking down the tops and the common cards played in this. It is the smallest deck core I have ever done in a video. I want to see. Let me know down below. Out of 60 cards, how many common cards do you think were across the 9 tops that I used for that video so far? They're not cherry picked. It's taking like the top 1 or 2 place finishes, otherwise in 25 plus person events, or if it's 50 plus, looking at like top 4, top 8, things like that, just to be able to put some information together for you guys. How many decks do you think I used for it? And yeah, or not how many decks, how many cards do you think are in that deck core, meaning a minimum that every single topping list played? It is by far the lowest one we have ever done. It's going to be exciting. Blue Steel. This deck's, I think it's just such a hard deck to pilot well, but any good player with this deck is a tier 1 deck. Any okay player can get it into that tier 2 status. A little less on the aggro, more maybe Robin Hoods and Tinkerbells and Ursula into that longer game repeat, Amethyst Steel Control, Bounce, where you're not playing like any Maleficents. On turn 2, you're always going to have that Smee, but into like turn 3, you might not have a multi-quester. This deck also still very strong. Likewise, Blurple is another deck that I think you should look out for. It's only topped so far in December. There was a top 8 that split an event, and they were first place after the Swiss calculation of it. I think Blurple's a deck to definitely look out for. I know a very talented player who's high on this deck, and hopefully he can do well with it in his events, but we have to keep it Moving into other strong rogue choices. Amber Amethyst, I think, still is there. I said that this was the best hyper aggro deck coming into the format, and I was wrong. Amethyst Emerald and Amethyst Steel both decided to upend what I had said, and I had them at like 2 and 3 respectively, and still really strong. But Amethyst Emerald, or Amber Amethyst, I think it just didn't really get the answers it needs for the format. And having played against the deck, it feels like whenever you quest with Daisy, you just give your opponent the card they need every single time. Just feels really, really bad. And I'm saying that as the guy who was getting every single card he needed. We have Emerald Steel Pirates. I'm still collecting the cards for this because I think this deck is sneaky good, and I think it's much better than anyone gives it credit for. I think it's by far the best way to play a location-based deck. People just need to catch on to the sauce. We have Amber Steel locations then, and Amber Steel Aggro, Dwarf Mine, if you will, for the Amber Steel Aggro, we'll call it. It's like an aggressive build, and you play the Dwarf Mine, maybe a little more locations, not too many, but you're being aggressive, and you just move a character to mine each turn, and you're pinging damage off your opponent. The actual one, the picture with Felix, is the more location-focused build that we saw from the DLC. I think both these are still strong rogue options. Jafar Wheel had a couple tops so far this format, nothing in December yet, but it was in November a couple times. So I think Jafar Wheel is another deck where those dedicated Jafar players, they're going to get their tops. We're going to see it pop up here in December. Amber Steel, I guess we have Amber Steel Aggro on here twice. We're going to ignore that one. Amber Ruby locations just in time. Towel Man had his updated build. I know that's not the full name of his channel. I can't think of it offhand. I know Dave would know. So Dave, if when you watch it, you can comment it. Yeah. Otherwise, Ruby Emerald, I think, is a strong rogue option. Whether you go with the evasives or just making it hard for your opponent to deal with it. Emerald getting so many strong cards options, whether you want to go discard evasives. Like there's such a good toolbox there to be tapped into. And then you have the Ruby, which also has the evasive threats. It has all your removal, like your brawls, into like your Medusas as you get a little bit higher, or even just like your Sisu Daring Visitor, which is evasive and removal in an aggro format. I think this deck is always going to be like an anti-meta deck, and I think it's actually in a pretty decent spot right now. Some less common rogue options too that you can think about would be like Ruby Steel. I think it's just that little draw consistency power away from being a tier 1 deck, honestly. For now, though, it's not really seeing any play, and it's going to stay in my rogue. We have Amber Emerald Aggro. There's just so many good aggro decks right now. This one kind of falls out of favor. Sapphire Emerald discard. I think that this deck is still better than it's getting credit for, and I think it may be because it's kind of glass cannony, and if it gets disrupted, you're gonna have a hard time winning with it. It takes a really good pilot to do well to win with plan B or C. Plan A, anyone can win with a turn 4 hand dump. You just control the game at that point, but if you get disrupted, can you recover? Can you finish out the game that way? Lemon Lime discard, likewise. I don't think it really improved enough to hold on to its tier 2 status. I moved it down to Rogue before the format, and I think it's kind of proving that it's going to stay in my Rogue category. Simba Aggro, which is Ruby Amber, focusing around the new Simba 5 cost card, and we have the aggressive Ruby Simba and the Bodyguard Simba, both 2 cost cards, and then you build a fast-paced deck kind of centered around those 3 characters. Mufasa decks, Ruby and Steel Fasa. Both of these can be really strong. They just lack a lot of representation, which is kind of what it takes to move up the charts. Can either of these win a big event? I have a hard time seeing that. Can they top it? Absolutely. Can they win it? I'm not quite sure about that. Set championships? Yeah. DLC, I don't see this deck winning. We have the hero support aggro type decks. The Amber Sapphire one. I'm going to give it a little more respect. I never really cared for this deck, but I'm going to put it in the Rogue category this time around. I think that it just, again, a broken record. Certain decks just don't see enough play to truly be represented well. I think that this is one of those decks where maybe it can be mid-rogue if it had more representation. I just don't have a whole lot of faith in it. And then we have some fun decks where if you want to play these, great. Locally, you can win locals with any deck listed here based on like your locals, your luck, RNG, how your day goes, your matchups, things like that. But any decent size or highly competitive event, I wouldn't really expect these fun decks to do a whole lot. Being Amber Ruby Songs, I just don't have a whole lot of faith in it. I thought that maybe last format it had a little bit of a chance, and it just has not taken off, has not really seen any play. Purple discard, not going to be a good deck. You're probably not going to see it, not a great threat. Green Jafar, I think that Steel Jafar is by far the better version, and Green Jafar just not really seeing a whole lot of play. Ruby Pirates, if you're going to play Pirates, I still think the Emerald Steel one is much better. I think Amber Emerald is also better. But Ruby Steel, I just don't think Pirates in this manner are in a great spot to be played. Emerald Steel aggro. Again, there's too many good aggro decks, so I'm going to put it down in the fun category. Ruby Steel actions. This deck's not good. Sharpshooter's not good. I'm sorry if you like it, but Sharpshooter's not good. Green Mufasa or Green Fasa and 7 Dwarves, Brooms, Emerald Amber, Pirates. All of these decks, none of them are going to cut it. Like I said, depending on your local, maybe you could take it down. But overall, I don't have a whole lot of faith in these decks. So not a whole lot really changed. We saw Purple Steel Aggro really going up to the top, as well as Amethyst Emerald. Both of those 2 decks going up into that tier 1 category, and we'll see if they can hold on to it. We'll do a brief update weekly. Not all these decks, but we'll just kind of look at the top 2 tiers and see how things are going and where the shift is. Blurple putting itself solid in that tier 2 category, I think. And then there's just so many rogue decks that are chomping at the bit, but December really hasn't been that open. There's basically 6 tier 1 decks so far for December, and then not a whole lot else. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what rogue decks end up coming up, but the ones in the first rogue category would be the decks I would expect to see sooner rather than later. The more rogue options are ones that I wouldn't be surprised to see as well, but I don't expect to see a lot of them. Fun decks I really don't expect to see whatsoever. I think we're going to continue to see that top tier pulling away. Maybe one of them fall out of favor, because 6 tier 1 decks is a lot. And then the tier 2 decks, I'm kind of curious to see how strong they remain. Amethyst Steel non-aggro especially, which actually in November, the more controlled build out-topped the aggro build, so seeing the drastic flip into December has been kind of neat to see. But again, we'll be back next week with another update and talk about the Tier 1 and Tier 2 options, where the movement is, whose stocks are up, whose stocks are down, and until next time, like, share, subscribe. Take care.